The lights on the bridge of the New Horizon flickered again. Captain Jake Morrison rubbed his tired eyes and looked at the damage report on his screen. 50 years had passed since the Terra incident, and this old ship was showing its age. Just like everything else human these days. "Captain, we're approaching the boundary," said Lisa Harper from her seat at navigation. Her voice was steady, but Jake could hear the worry underneath. Behind them lay everything they had ever known. Ahead was nothing but empty space and whatever scraps of humanity had survived out there. The Galactic Council had been very clear 50 years ago. Humans were too dangerous, too unpredictable, too violent for civilized space. They had to go. All of them. Every colony, every station, every ship. The great species of the galaxy, the proud Zephyrians with their crystal cities, the cold Vorthan collective with their perfect logic, had voted together. Humanity was banished. Jake remembered the stories his grandfather told him. How the human ambassadors had tried to explain what really happened at Terra, how they begged for another chance, how the council members just looked at them with disgust and fear. The decision was final. Humans had 1 year to leave all council space, and they could never return. "Tom, how are the engines holding up?" Jake called to the engineering station. "Tom." Bradley looked up from his screens with a grim smile. "They're running on hope and spare parts, Captain, but they'll get us where we need to go." Where they needed to go was the quarantine zone, a vast empty region at the edge of known space where humans were supposed to stay forever. Jake had been ordered to take the New Horizon there by the last human government before it collapsed. His mission was simple: find any surviving human settlements and help them however he could. Dr. Kate Reynolds sat at the science station studying long-range sensor readings. She was younger than the rest of the crew, born after the exile began. Sometimes Jake envied her. She had never seen Earth's blue skies or walked through the great space stations that humans once built. But she also never felt the pain of losing it all. "Captain," Kate said suddenly, her voice excited. "I'm picking up something strange." Jake moved to her station. The sensor display showed what should have been empty space. According to all the maps, this region had nothing but asteroids and dead worlds. But Kate's readings showed something else. "Those energy signatures," she whispered. "They're not natural." Lisa checked her navigation charts again. "We're definitely in the quarantine zone now, Captain, but this can't be right." On the main screen, space looked empty and black. But as they flew deeper into the zone, small objects began to appear. At first, Jake thought they were just space rocks. Then he realized what he was seeing. Ships. Dozens of them. They were unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Some looked like they had been built from salvaged parts of old human vessels. Others were completely new designs that seemed to bend and flow like living things. All of them were clearly human-made, but far more advanced than anything humans had possessed 50 years ago. "Captain," Tom said, his voice shaking slightly, "I'm reading power levels that shouldn't be possible. These ships are running on technology we don't have." Before Jake could respond, his communication system came alive. A voice spoke in clear English, but with an accent he didn't recognize. "Unknown vessel, this is Admiral Ryan Clark of the Shadow Fleet. State your identity and purpose." Jake stared at the communication panel. Shadow Fleet. He had never heard of any Shadow Fleet. According to everything he knew, the human military had been disbanded after the exile. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the New Horizon," he replied carefully. "We're carrying out orders from the last Earth government. We're looking for human survivors." There was a long pause. Then the voice spoke again, warmer this time. "Captain Morrison, welcome to the Outer Reach. Please follow the escort ships to Haven Station. There are some things you need to see." 2 sleek vessels appeared on either side of the New Horizon. They moved with a grace that made Jake's old ship feel like a flying brick. As they traveled deeper into the asteroid field, more structures became visible. What Jake had thought were dead rocks were actually hidden bases and shipyards. "My God," Lisa whispered. "How many people are out here?" Kate was studying her sensors with growing amazement. "Captain, I'm reading multiple space stations, mining operations, and what looks like farms. Actual farming platforms in space. This isn't just survival. This is a civilization. As they approached Haven Station, Jake felt his breath catch. The station was massive, easily 10 times larger than anything humans had built before the exile. It looked like a piece of space junk from the outside, but Jake could see through the disguise. Underneath the fake rust and debris was advanced technology that gleamed with power. Docking bay doors opened to receive them, and Jake guided his ship inside. The docking bay was clean and efficient, filled with ships that showed design principles he had never seen before. Human crews moved with purpose and confidence, wearing uniforms that bore no resemblance to the old Earth military. As Jake and his crew stepped off their ship, a tall woman in a crisp blue uniform approached them. Her hair was gray, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. "Captain Morrison, I'm Director Helen Foster. Welcome to what's left of humanity. Or should I say, what humanity has become." Jake looked around the docking bay in wonder. "Director, how is this possible?" "We were told all human settlements were destroyed or abandoned." Helen smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Jake's heart race with hope for the first time in years. "Captain, the Galactic Council made one very big mistake when they exiled us. They thought they were getting rid of humanity's problems. Instead, they gave us the freedom to become something much more dangerous than they ever imagined. Come with me. There are 50 years of history you need to catch up on." As they walked through corridors filled with busy people and advanced technology, Jake realized that everything he thought he knew about humanity's fate was wrong. They hadn't just survived their exile, they had thrived. And now, looking at the confident faces around him, Jake began to wonder what else the galaxy didn't know about what humans had been doing in the dark. The exile was supposed to be humanity's end. Instead, it had been their beginning. 3 years had passed since Jake Morrison first laid eyes on Haven Station. Now he stood in the command center, watching dozens of screens showing human activity across the galaxy. He still couldn't believe how much he had been wrong about humanity's fate. Director Helen Foster walked up beside him, carrying a cup of coffee that smelled better than anything Jake had tasted in decades. She had aged well during her time in exile, and her gray hair now showed streaks of silver that caught the light from the displays. "Hard to believe, isn't it, Jake?" she said, sipping her coffee. "When the council threw us out, they thought we would just disappear, hide in some corner and slowly die out." Jake nodded, still staring at the screens. Each one showed a different human settlement. Some were built inside hollow asteroids. Others floated freely in space, disguised as space junk. A few were actually built on planets that the council had marked as worthless. "How many are we now?" Jake asked. "Last count was just over 200 million, Helen replied. "We've got 347 major settlements, and that doesn't count the mobile fleets or the research stations." Jake shook his head in amazement. When humanity was exiled, less than 50 million people had made it out of council space alive. Now they had quadrupled their numbers while living in secret. "The birth rate has been incredible," Helen continued. "Turns out when people have hope for the future, they want to build families, and we've been very good at giving people hope." Alex Turner approached them, holding a data pad filled with intelligence reports. As Chief Intelligence Officer for the Outer Reach Collective, Alex knew more about what was happening in council space than most council members did. "Helen, Jake, you need to see this," Alex said, his voice excited. "We've been monitoring council communications for months now, and things are getting bad for them." Jake took the data pad and read through the reports. Economic problems were spreading through council space. Several member species were having trouble feeding their populations. Trade disputes were becoming more common, and some worlds were talking about leaving the council entirely. "The Zephyrians are having the worst problems," Alex explained. "Their crystal cities require massive amounts of energy to maintain, but their power sources are failing. They've been asking other council members for help, but everyone is dealing with their own problems." Helen smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. 50 years ago, they had everything they needed: resources, territory, trade partners. Now look at them. Jake continued reading. The reports showed that the Vorthan Collective was facing rebellion on several of their worlds. Their perfect logic systems couldn't solve problems that required creativity and flexibility. Species that had been Happy under council rule, were now questioning whether the old ways still worked. "There's more," Alex said, pulling out another datapad. "We've been in contact with some of the unhappy worlds. Quietly, of course. They don't know they're talking to humans, but they're definitely interested in alternatives to council membership." Before Jake could respond, a young pilot burst into the command center. Sam Davis was barely 25, but he had already proven himself as one of their best scouts. His face was flushed with excitement. "Director Foster," Sam said breathlessly, "you have to see what I found." Sam activated a holographic display in the center of the room. The image showed an ancient artifact, covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change as they watched. "I discovered this in the Kepler sector, hidden inside what we thought was a dead comet," Sam explained. "But it's not dead. It's been waiting." Dr. Kate Reynolds had joined them, and she studied the artifact with growing interest. Over the past 3 years, she had become their chief expert on alien technology and history. "These symbols," Kate said slowly, "they're not from any known council species, but they're definitely artificial. Someone made this." Sam nodded eagerly. "That's not the best part. When I got close to it, the artifact activated. It started transmitting coordinates. The holographic display changed, showing star maps with several locations marked in pulsing red light. Jake recognized some of the areas. They were all regions that the council had declared forbidden or dangerous. 12 locations total," Sam continued. "All of them in areas where no council ships are allowed to go, just like the quarantine zone where we live." Helen studied the star map carefully. "Alex, have we ever had reports of other species being exiled by the council?" Alex pulled up historical records on his datapad. "Actually, yes. Over the past 500 years, at least 6 different species have been declared incompatible with galactic civilization and banished from council. Space. We always assumed they died out." Kate's eyes lit up with understanding. What if they didn't die out? What if they survived just like we did? The command center fell silent as everyone considered the implications. If other exiled species had survived and built their own hidden civilizations, humanity might not be alone in their opposition to the council. "Sam," Helen said finally, "how fast can you prepare your ship for a long-range mission?" "Give me 6 hours," Sam replied instantly. "Alex, I want everything we have on these exiled species. Their capabilities, their last known locations, everything. Already on it," Alex said, his fingers flying over his datapad. Jake looked at the star map again, feeling a mixture of excitement and fear. "Helen, if we make contact with these other exiles, we're not just talking about humanity anymore. We're talking about building an alliance." Helen nodded slowly. "The council threw us all away because they thought we were problems they didn't want to deal with. Maybe it's time to show them what happens when all their problems decide to work together." Kate was still studying the artifact data. "There's something else. The technology in this artifact is more advanced than anything the council has. If the species that built it are still alive, then we might have allies who are stronger than our enemies," Helen finished. The screens around the command center continued to show human settlements across the galaxy, but now Jake saw them differently. They weren't just hiding places anymore. They were the foundation of something bigger, something that could challenge the most powerful force in the galaxy. Sam was already heading for the door, eager to begin his mission. "Director, which coordinates should I investigate first?" Helen looked at the star map one more time, then pointed to the closest location. "Start there. But Sam, remember, we don't know what we're going to find. These species have been in exile. Even longer than we have. They might not be friendly." "Understood," Sam said with a grin. "But if they hate the council as much as we do, that's a good start." As Sam left to prepare his ship, Jake realized that everything was about to change again. For 50 years, humanity had grown in secret, building strength in the darkness. Now, they were about to discover if they were truly alone in their struggle, or if the galaxy held other forgotten peoples who remembered what it felt like to be cast aside. The Outer Reach Collective was about to become something much larger, and the Galactic Council had no idea what was coming. Sam Davis gripped the controls of his scout ship as he approached the Kepler void. 2 months had passed since he first found the ancient artifact, and now he was following its coordinates into the darkest region of space he had ever seen. Behind him, Captain Morrison's ship and Dr. Reynolds' research vessel followed at a safe distance. The void looked empty on all sensors, but Sam knew better than to trust appearances. Humans had learned to hide their settlements well, and if other exiled species had survived, they would have learned the same tricks. "Sam, are you picking up anything?" Morrison's voice crackled over the communication system. "Nothing yet, Captain. But that doesn't mean there's nothing here." Sam activated the special beacon that Kate Reynolds had built, based on the artifact's technology. If anyone was listening, they would know that the visitors came in peace and shared a common enemy with the Council. Minutes passed in silence. Then, Sam's sensors exploded with activity. Ships were appearing from nowhere, materializing out of what had seemed like empty space. They were massive, built like fortress ships with thick armor and heavy weapons. Their design was completely alien, but Sam could see the practical intelligence behind it. A deep voice spoke over the communication channel, using words that Sam's translator computer struggled to understand. "Unknown vessels, you carry the beacon of the old enemies. State your purpose or be destroyed." Morrison took over the communication. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Human Outer Reach Collective. We received coordinates from an ancient artifact. We believe we share a common history with you." There was a long pause. Then the alien voice spoke again, this time in clearer language. "Humans, we remember your species from Council records. You were exiled for the same crimes they accused us of. I am War Leader Ironheart of the Ashanti Remnant. Follow our ships, but attempt no hostile actions." The alien vessels formed an escort around the human ships, guiding them toward what looked like a dead moon. As they got closer, Sam realized the moon was hollow. The entrance to a massive underground city opened before them, and they flew inside. Ashanti City was built for war. Every structure looked like it could withstand attack, and armed warriors watched from defensive positions as the human ships landed. The Ashanti themselves were tall and powerful, with skin that looked like it was made of metal and eyes that glowed with inner fire. Ironheart met them at the landing platform. She was older than the other Ashanti, with scars that told stories of many battles. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of exile. "So the humans survived their banishment," she said, studying Morrison carefully. "The Council told us you had all died. They said your species was too weak to survive in the outer darkness." Dr. Reynolds stepped forward, carrying translation, equipment, and samples of human technology. "We survived by adapting and growing stronger. From what we can see, you did the same." Ironheart laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "Stronger, yes, but not strong enough to reclaim our homeworld. For 300 years we have planned our return. For 300 years we have built weapons and ships, but we are too few, and the Council is too powerful." Morrison nodded with understanding. "That's why we're here. We believe that working together, all the exiled species might be able to accomplish what none of us could do alone." The Ashanti leader studied the humans for a long moment. Then she gestured for them to follow her deeper into the city. As they walked, she explained how her people had survived. "When the Council cast us out, they expected us to fight each other and destroy ourselves. Instead, we became united. Every Ashanti now serves the same goal: to return home and reclaim what was stolen from us." Kate Reynolds was taking notes on everything she saw. The Ashanti technology was impressive but focused entirely on military applications. They had built the perfect war machine, but they lacked the numbers to use it effectively. Their next destination was the Veil Nebula, where the artifact's coordinates pointed to another exiled species. The journey took several days, and during that time Ironheart traveled with them aboard Morrison's ship. "Tell me about these other coordinates," she said one evening as they shared a meal. "How many species do you think survived their exile?" "We don't know," Morrison admitted, "but if the artifact is right, there could be several others out there." When they reached the Veil Nebula, the first contact was completely different. No ships appeared to challenge them. Instead, A voice simply began speaking in their minds. Welcome, travelers from distant worlds. We are the echoing minds. We have been waiting for you. Dr. Reynolds gasped and grabbed her head. They're telepaths. I can feel them in my thoughts, but they're not trying to hurt us. A figure materialized on the bridge, but it wasn't really there. It was a projection created directly in their minds. The being called itself Node Prime, and it spoke without moving its mouth. We were exiled because the Council feared our ability to share thoughts across space. They said we were violating the privacy of other species. But we only wanted to understand and communicate. Ironheart was uncomfortable with the mental contact, but she forced herself to remain calm. Can you tell us about the Council's current activities? Node Prime's projection smiled. We have been watching them for centuries. Their thoughts are loud and easy to read when they are afraid or angry. And lately, they have been both very afraid and very angry. The information that Node Prime shared was incredible. The echoing minds could sense the thoughts and emotions of every council member across vast distances. They knew about political disputes, military weaknesses, and economic problems that the council tried to keep secret. The council is not as strong as they pretend to be, Node Prime explained. Many of their member species are unhappy. Some are already looking for alternatives to council membership. Morrison felt a spark of hope. Would you be willing to share this information with us? And would you consider joining an alliance of exiled species? We have been alone for so long, Node Prime replied, and for the first time, the projection showed emotion. Yes, we will join your alliance, and we will help you contact the other exiled species. When they returned to Haven Station, Director Helen Foster listened to their reports with growing excitement. The command center had been expanded to accommodate representatives from both the Ashanti Remnant and the Echoing Minds. Colonel Ben Wright, their chief military strategist, studied the intelligence data that Node Prime had provided. This changes everything, he said. The Council isn't unbeatable. They have weaknesses we can exploit. Helen stood before a holographic display showing all the known exile coordinates. We're not just talking about revenge anymore. We're talking about offering something better. A new kind of galactic community where species aren't cast out for being different. Ironheart slammed her fist on the table. The Council destroyed our homes and scattered our people. They deserve to face our wrath. They do, Morrison agreed. But what if we could make them irrelevant instead? What if we offered their member species something better than what the Council provides? Node Prime's mental voice reached all of them. There are others who think as you do. Council species who are tired of the old ways. Young Sam Davis could make contact with them. Sam, who had been quiet during most of the meeting, suddenly looked up. You want me to go into Council space? That's incredibly dangerous, Helen smiled. Sam, you've already proven you can find things that are supposed to be impossible to find. Now we need you to find something even more valuable. Allies among our former enemies. As the meeting continued, Jake Morrison realized they were no longer planning just to survive in exile. They were planning to change the entire galaxy. The forgotten species were about to remind the Council that some problems don't just go away when you try to ignore them. They grow stronger in the dark. Sam Davis pulled his trader's cap low over his eyes as he walked through the crowded marketplace on Mindor Prime. 6 months had passed since he began his most dangerous mission, operating deep inside Council space under a false identity. To anyone watching, he looked like just another freelance cargo hauler trying to make a living. But Sam was much more than that. Hidden in his ship's cargo hold were samples of human technology that could revolutionize how the galaxy did business. His job was to find the right people to share it with, people who were tired of the Council's endless rules and restrictions. The Mindorian trade houses controlled most of the commerce in this sector, but they were growing frustrated with Council regulations. Every shipment had to be approved by 3 different agencies. Every trade agreement needed permits that took months to obtain. The bureaucracy was killing their profits. Sam's contact was waiting for him in a small restaurant that served traditional Mindorian food. Trade Minister Velkoth was a middle-aged alien with blue skin and forearms, perfect for handling multiple tasks at once. He had agreed to meet with Sam after hearing rumors of new technologies that could bypass council trade restrictions. "You claim to have something that can help us," Velkoth said quietly, his voice barely audible over the noise of other diners. "The council has spies everywhere. If they discover we are even talking about this..." Sam reached into his bag and pulled out a small device that looked like an ordinary datapad. "This communication system can't be monitored by council technology. It uses quantum encryption that their sensors can't detect." Velkoth's eyes widened as he examined the device. "This is impossible. Council science says such technology cannot exist. Council science is 50 years behind what's actually possible," Sam replied with a smile. "There are entire civilizations out there developing technology, while the council argues about regulations." Over the next hour, Sam showed Velkoth other innovations. Manufacturing techniques that could produce goods faster and cheaper than council methods. Transportation systems that could move cargo without requiring council permits. Agricultural technologies that could feed populations with half the resources. "Who are you really?" Velkoth asked finally. "These technologies are too advanced to come from some random trader." Sam had prepared for this question. "I represent a group of independent species who have been developing these innovations outside council space. We're looking for partners who are ready to try something different." Velkoth was quiet for a long time, thinking about the implications. Finally, he leaned forward. "What do you want in return?" "Access to your trade networks, raw materials, and most importantly, discretion. The council can't know about this until we're ready." The trade minister nodded slowly. "I'll need to discuss this with the other house leaders, but if your technology works as well as you claim, we might be very interested in this partnership." 3 weeks later, Sam was on Thermax, the industrial center of the Gamma sector. The planet's factories produced most of the manufactured goods used by council worlds, but the workers were unhappy. Council production quotas were impossible to meet, and the penalties for failure were severe. Chief Engineer Maya Collins had been working undercover in the factories for 2 months, posing as a maintenance specialist. She had built relationships with local supervisors who were desperate for solutions to their production problems. "The new assembly techniques are working perfectly," Maya reported to Sam during a secret meeting in an abandoned warehouse. "We've increased production by 30% while using 20% less energy. The local managers are calling it a miracle." Sam nodded with satisfaction. "How are they handling the secrecy?" "Better than expected. Everyone here hates the quotas so much that they're willing to try anything. As long as we keep delivering results, they'll keep quiet about where the improvements are coming from." Meanwhile, back on Haven Station, Communications Officer Pete Johnson was coordinating with a growing network of sympathetic individuals across council space. His job was the most dangerous of all, maintaining contact with people who could be executed for treason if they were discovered. "We've got contacts on 47 different worlds now," Pete reported to Director Foster during their weekly briefing. "Teachers, engineers, doctors, even some military officers. They're all tired of the council's corruption and incompetence." Helen Foster studied the intelligence reports that were flowing in from across the galaxy. "What about the Zephyrians? Any luck making contact with their dissidents?" "Actually, yes," Pete replied with excitement. "We've been approached by someone who calls themselves the Benefactor. They claim to be high-ranking Zephyrian nobility who wants to overthrow their own government." "That sounds too good to be true," Helen said suspiciously. "Maybe, but the intelligence they've provided has been completely accurate. They knew about council fleet movements a week before they happened. They warned us about security sweeps that could have caught our people." In her research facility, Dr. Kate Reynolds was making the most important discovery of all. Using historical records obtained through their spy network, she had uncovered the truth about the Terra incident that led to humanity's exile. It was all a lie, Kate told Captain Morrison as she showed him the evidence. The Terra incident wasn't caused by human aggression. It was a false flag operation designed by hardline council members to justify getting rid of us. Morrison stared at the documents in disbelief. "Why would they do that?" "Because we were asking too many questions," Human diplomats had discovered massive corruption in the council government, food shipments being diverted to wealthy worlds while poor planets starved, military contracts being awarded to companies owned by council members' families. We were about to expose it all. So they fabricated evidence to make us look like the villains, Morrison said, his anger growing. Not just fabricated, they actually caused the incident themselves, then blamed us for it. Thousands of humans died in that attack, and it was their own people who killed them. Back in council space, Sam Davis was meeting with his most important contact yet. The individual had requested the meeting through encrypted channels, claiming to represent multiple species who were ready to break away from the council entirely. The meeting took place on a neutral space station in the border region. Sam's contact was a heavily cloaked figure who spoke through a voice modifier, but their information was incredibly detailed and accurate. 17 species are ready to declare independence, the contact said. They're just waiting for an alternative to council membership, something that offers protection without the oppression. Sam felt his heart racing. What kind of protection are they looking for? Military defense against council retaliation, trade agreements that don't require impossible regulations, and most importantly, proof that there's a better way to organize galactic civilization. We can provide all of that, Sam replied carefully, but they would need to be willing to stand together when the time comes. They're ready. The question is, are you? When Sam's report reached Haven Station, it triggered emergency meetings throughout the Exile Alliance. Admiral Ryan Clark studied the intelligence with Colonel Wright and the other military leaders. They're planning a final solution to the human problem, Clark said grimly. A massive fleet operation to wipe out every human settlement in the outer territories. Helen Foster felt a chill run down her spine. How long do we have? 6 months, maybe less. The council has been building up their forces for the past year. They think we're still just scattered refugees hiding in the dark. Ironheart of the Bow, Ashanti remnant slammed her fist on the table. Let them come. We've been preparing for this fight for 3 centuries. Node Prime's mental voice reached all of them. The time for hiding is ending. But we are not the same species they exiled long ago. We have grown strong in the darkness they forced us into. Helen looked around the room at representatives from dozens of species, humans, Ashanti, echoing minds, and the other exiled civilizations they had contacted. Then it's time for Operation Dawn. It's time to show the galaxy that the forgotten can become the future. Morrison nodded grimly. The council thinks they're hunting scattered refugees. They have no idea they're about to face an alliance that's been 50 years in the making. As alarms began sounding throughout Haven Station, signaling the beginning of their greatest gamble, Sam Davis smiled. The quiet revolution was about to become very loud indeed. Operation Dawn began at exactly midnight, Galactic Standard Time. Across 300 worlds, the largest intelligence operation in galactic history activated simultaneously. Sam Davis sat in his hidden command post on Mindor Prime, watching as his carefully built network of allies began broadcasting the truth to every corner of council space. The evidence was overwhelming. 50 years of corruption, lies, and cover-ups flashed across communication screens throughout the galaxy. The real story of the Terra incident played on news channels that the council had thought they controlled. Financial records showing stolen. Resources appeared on government networks. Most importantly, an invitation was broadcast to every world. Join the Terran Commonwealth and escape the Council's failures. On Thermax, Chief Engineer Maya Collins watched factory workers gather around communication screens with growing excitement when they saw the manufacturing technologies she had been secretly introducing, along with proof that the Council had been deliberately limiting their productivity. Their anger turned to action. "We're with the Commonwealth," the factory supervisor announced to his workers. "Send word to whoever is in charge. Thermax Industrial Union declares independence from the Galactic Council." Similar scenes played out across hundreds of worlds. The Mindorian trade houses formally announced their withdrawal from council membership within the first hour. Colonial worlds that had been struggling under council taxation declared their freedom. Even some core council worlds began demanding emergency sessions to address the revelations. Trade Minister Velkoth stood before the Mindorian assembly, holding up the communication device that Sam had given him months earlier. For too long, we have accepted limitations that served only the Council's power, not our prosperity. Today, we choose a different path. At Haven Station, Director Helen Foster watched the responses flood in through their quantum communication network. The screen showed green lights appearing across the galaxy as world after world chose independence. Each green light represented millions of people choosing hope over fear. 17 species in the first hour, reported Communications Officer Pete Johnson. 23 colonial clusters have declared independence. The Thermax Industrial Union is offering to produce Commonwealth ships and equipment. Admiral Ryan Clark stood in the command center of the flagship vessel New Terra, watching as the Shadow Fleet prepared for its first public appearance in 50 years. Around him, ships that had been hidden in asteroid fields and fake debris clouds were powering up their real engines and dropping their disguises. All fleet commanders, this is Admiral Clark, he announced over the fleet communication system. Today we stop hiding. Today we show the galaxy what humanity has built in the darkness. The Commonwealth fleet that emerged from the outer territories was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships incorporated technology from all the allied species, Ashanti armor plating, echoing minds communication systems, and innovations developed during 50 years of secret research. They moved with purpose and confidence, no longer refugees but liberators. Captain Morrison led the first official Commonwealth squadron into former Council space. His ship, now called the Freedom's Dawn, carried not weapons of conquest but supplies for the worlds that had declared independence. Behind him flew vessels from every species in the Exile Alliance, their hulls marked with the Commonwealth symbol, a star surrounded by interconnected circles. The climactic moment came at the former Council headquarters on Zephyr Prime. The massive crystal city that had once seemed unbreakable now flickered with unstable power. The Zephyrian government was in chaos as reports came in of massive defections throughout their territory. Admiral Clark's fleet arrived to find not an enemy armada, but a single Zephyrian vessel waiting for them. The ship transmitted a message, on all frequencies. Commonwealth vessels, this is Prince Zalthyran of the Zephyrian Royal House. I am the one you have known as the Benefactor. I formally request permission to surrender my fleet to Commonwealth authority. Jake Morrison couldn't hide his surprise as the mysterious ally finally revealed himself. Prince Zalthyran, why are you doing this? The Zephyrian prince's voice was tired but determined. Because the Commonwealth represents what the Council was supposed to be. Unity through cooperation, not domination through fear. My people deserve better than the corruption our leaders have created. Within hours, the Zephyrian royal fleet had formally joined the Commonwealth. Other Council forces, seeing the writing on the wall, began requesting terms for peaceful surrender. The few ships that chose to fight found themselves hopelessly outnumbered and quickly defeated. The Vorthon Collective, true to their logical nature, sent negotiators rather than warships. Their representative, a cold-voiced artificial intelligence, called Logic Prime, met with Admiral Clark aboard the New Terra. Our analysis indicates that resistance would be both futile and illogical, Logic Prime stated. We request a non-aggression treaty and the right to maintain autonomy over our core worlds. Granted, Clark replied. The Commonwealth doesn't seek to conquer. We seek to offer choice. 5 years later, Director Helen Foster stood before the first Galactic Assembly on New Terra, humanity's new capital world. The planet had been transformed from a barren rock into a thriving center of galactic civilization, with cities that incorporated architectural styles from hundreds of different species. Representatives from over 200 species filled the Great Assembly Hall. Former enemies sat beside former victims, united by the simple principle that cooperation worked better than domination. The old council chambers on Zephyr Prime had been converted into a museum, preserving the history of what happened when fear ruled the galaxy. Today marks the 5th anniversary of Operation Dawn, Helen announced to the assembled delegates. 5 years ago we were scattered refugees hiding in the darkness and hoping just to survive. Today we govern the largest voluntary association of worlds in galactic history. Captain Morrison, now serving as Commonwealth Explorer Corps commander, prepared his ship for another mission beyond the galaxy's edge. His crew was entirely volunteer, drawn from dozens of species who wanted to carry the Commonwealth's message of cooperation to whatever civilizations awaited among distant stars. "Ready for departure, Captain," reported his navigator, a young Ashanti warrior who had chosen exploration over revenge. "Any word from the Outer Rim expeditions?" Morrison asked. 3 new species have requested Commonwealth membership this month," the navigator replied with a smile. "Apparently news of what we've accomplished is spreading faster than our ships can travel." Dr. Kate Reynolds sat in her research facility, writing the final chapters of her historical record of humanity's rise. The elderly scientist had spent the past 5 years documenting every aspect of the transformation from exile to empire. "The Council made a fundamental error," she wrote. "They believed that casting out their problems would make those problems disappear. Instead, they gave those problems the freedom to become solutions. The species they threw away built something better than what they lost. As New Terra's sun set over the Commonwealth capital, children from dozens of different species played, together in parks that their grandparents could never have imagined. Former slave worlds now governed themselves. Former enemies had become the closest of allies. Trade flowed freely between worlds that had once been forbidden to communicate. The forgotten exiles had indeed built an empire, but not through conquest or fear. They had built it through the simple revolutionary idea that every species deserved dignity, every world deserved choice, and every being deserved hope. Sam Davis, now serving as Commonwealth Director of Interspecies Relations, stood on his office balcony watching ships from across the galaxy arrive and depart from New Terra's spaceport. Each ship carried the Commonwealth symbol, that star surrounded by interconnected circles, but more importantly, they carried the promise that no species would ever again be forgotten or cast aside. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, but perhaps the greatest wonder of all was how quickly fear could be replaced by hope when people were given the chance to choose their own future. The Commonwealth had proven that empires built on cooperation could be stronger than any empire built on conquest. And in the darkness between the stars, other civilizations were beginning to take notice of the remarkable thing that the Forgotten had accomplished. The age of exile was over. The age of unity had begun.
The Valari Collective had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. Their empire stretched across 100,000 worlds, and no species in the known galaxy dared to challenge their power. They were the oldest civilization, the most advanced, and the most feared. Their silver warships moved through space like predators, and wherever they went, other races bowed their heads and accepted their fate. This was the natural order of things. The strong ruled, and the weak served. The Valari had always been strong. Commander Zorath stood on the bridge of his observation vessel, the Endless Dawn, watching the data scroll across his display screens. He was old by Valari standards, nearly 400 years, and he had spent most of that time cataloging primitive civilizations. It was boring work, but necessary. The collective needed to know about every species in the galaxy, needed to track their development, needed to decide when they were ready to be brought into the fold. Most species accepted their place without resistance. Those that did not were quickly taught the error of their ways. The latest species on his list called themselves humans. They came from a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star on the edge of the Orion Arm. Zorath had been watching them for 50 years now, ever since their first radio signals had reached Valari listening posts. They were a curious species, violent and chaotic, always fighting among themselves. They had nearly destroyed their own world several times with their primitive weapons. Zorath had expected them to wipe themselves out long before they ever reached the stars, but they had surprised him. Somehow, despite their constant wars and their self-destructive tendencies, the humans had developed faster than light travel. It was crude technology, a clumsy warp drive that left visible ripples in subspace. But it worked. They had begun to spread beyond their home system, establishing colonies on nearby worlds, building stations in the darkness between stars. They were expanding, and the collective did not like it when primitive species expanded without permission. Zorath sent his report to the High Council and received his orders within days. A scout fleet would be dispatched to the human solar system. They would make contact, explain the situation, and give the humans a choice. They could join the collective peacefully, accepting their place as a labor caste, or they could be conquered by force. Most species chose the first option. The second was too terrible to contemplate. The scout fleet consisted of 12 warships, sleek silver vessels armed with plasma cannons and protected by energy shields that could withstand almost any attack. Zorath commanded from the endless dawn, watching as his fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the human solar system. The journey had taken 3 days, and his crews were eager to begin their work. This would be a simple mission, over within hours. The humans had no significant military presence in space, no weapons capable of threatening Volari warships, no experience in interstellar combat. They would see the fleet, understand their situation, and surrender. That was how it always went. But as the Volari ships began their approach toward the inner system, something unexpected happened. A single vessel emerged from behind the fourth planet. A rust-colored world, the humans called Mars. The ship was unlike anything Zorath had ever seen. It was ugly. All sharp angles and exposed weapon ports, painted in dark gray with white lettering on its hull. The lettering identified it as the USS Horizon, and it was broadcasting a warning on all frequencies. Zorath studied the vessel with growing curiosity. It was large for a human ship, nearly half the size of his own command vessel, but it looked crude and primitive. There were no elegant curves, no flowing lines, nothing that suggested advanced engineering. The hull was covered in what appeared to be armor plating. Thick slabs of metal bolted directly to the frame. The weapon ports were clearly visible, dozens of them arranged along the ship's flanks and spine. It looked like something built for war, pure and simple, with no consideration for beauty or efficiency. The warning message was simple. The human vessel identified itself and demanded that the Volari fleet halt its advance. It claimed that the solar system was sovereign human territory and that any unauthorized incursion would be considered an act of war. The message was delivered in broken Volari tradespeak, clearly translated by a computer, but the meaning was unmistakable. The humans were telling the collective to leave. Zorath almost laughed. The arrogance of these primitives was astounding. A single ship, alone against 12 Volari warships, and they were making demands. He opened a communication channel and explained the situation calmly and clearly. The Volari collective claimed this region of space. The humans had 2 choices. They could surrender peacefully and accept collective rule, or they could be destroyed. There was no third option. Zorath gave them 1 standard rotation to make their decision. The response came almost immediately. A human female appeared on his display screen, her face hard and her eyes cold. She identified herself as Captain Laura Mitchell, commanding officer of the USS Horizon. She was not young, perhaps middle-aged by human standards, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that suggested years of experience. She listened to Zorath's ultimatum without expression, and when he finished speaking, she was silent for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something that others did not, the smile of a predator watching its prey walk into a trap. She spoke slowly and clearly, making sure that Zorath understood every word. She told him no. Zorath stared at the screen in disbelief. No species had ever refused a collective ultimatum. It simply was not done. He tried to explain again, tried to make her understand the hopelessness of her situation, but Captain Mitchell simply shook her head. She said that humanity did not bow to threats. She said that her people had fought too hard and sacrificed too much to surrender their freedom to anyone. She said that if the Volari wanted Earth, they would have to come and take it. Then she cut the communication channel. Zorath sat in silence for a long time, trying to understand what had just happened. His officers looked at him expectantly, waiting for orders. The humans had refused to surrender. That meant only one thing. They would have to be taught a lesson, shown the true power of the collective, made to understand their place in the galactic order. He gave the order to advance. The scout fleet moved forward, weapons charging, shields at full power. They would disable the human vessel, capture its crew, and proceed to Earth. This foolish captain and her single ship would be the first casualties of the war, a footnote in history, quickly forgotten. That was what Zorath believed. He was wrong. The Valari scout fleet moved toward the human warship in perfect formation. 12 silver vessels, their hulls gleaming in the light of the distant sun, their weapons charged and ready. Commander Zorath watched from the bridge of the endless dawn, confident in the outcome of this encounter. The humans had made their choice, and now they would face the consequences. It was almost sad. Really. Such a young species. So full of potential. And they had thrown it all away with their stubborn pride. He ordered a warning shot. There was no need to destroy the human vessel outright. The collective wanted prisoners, wanted to study these strange creatures, wanted to understand how they had developed space travel so quickly. A precision plasma burst would disable their engines without causing too much damage. The ship would be crippled, its crew would be captured, and the rest of humanity would learn from their example. The lead Valari cruiser fired. A bolt of superheated plasma streaked across the void, a brilliant blue streak against the blackness of space. It struck the USS Horizon directly amidships, exactly where the sensors indicated the main engine housing should be. The impact was spectacular, a flash of light that briefly outshone the distant stars. But something was wrong. The human ship did not break apart. It did not lose power. It did not even seem to shake from the impact. Zorath leaned forward in his command chair, staring at his sensor displays in confusion. The readings made no sense. The plasma bolt had struck the target. He had seen it with his own eyes, but the human vessel was completely undamaged. Its shields had absorbed the entire attack without any significant loss of power. That should have been impossible. The humans were primitives. They had only developed faster than light travel a few decades ago. Their technology should have been thousands of years behind the collective. Their shields should have failed instantly under Valari weapons fire. But the numbers on Zorath's display screens told a different story. The human shields were holding, and they were holding easily. On the bridge of the USS Horizon, Captain Laura Mitchell stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the tactical display with calm eyes. Her executive officer, Commander Jake Reyes, reported the shield status in a steady voice. Minimal degradation, well within acceptable parameters. The alien weapon had been powerful, he admitted, but nothing their defenses could not handle. Laura nodded slowly. She had expected this. The Valari were arrogant, accustomed to facing species that could not fight back. They had grown complacent over the centuries, relying on their reputation and their superior numbers rather than actual combat effectiveness. They had forgotten what it meant to face an enemy that was willing and able to hurt them. Humanity had not forgotten. Humanity had never had the luxury of forgetting. For thousands of years, humans had fought each other across the face of their world. They had developed weapons of terrible power, weapons capable of destroying cities, weapons capable of ending civilizations. They had stared into the abyss of their own extinction and somehow found the strength to pull back from the edge. And when they finally reached the stars, they had brought those lessons with them. The Horizon was not just a warship. It was the culmination of human military technology, the product of centuries of bloody conflict and hard-won knowledge. Its armor was made from advanced composites that could withstand impacts that would shatter ordinary steel. Its shields used principles of physics that the Valari had never even theorized. Its weapons were simple in concept but devastating in execution. Designed not to impress or intimidate but to destroy. Laura gave the order to return fire. The Horizon's main battery consisted of 12 magnetic accelerator cannons arranged along the ship's spine. Each cannon was capable of launching a 2-ton tungsten projectile at 3% the speed of light. At that velocity, the kinetic energy of a single round was equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. The Valari had never encountered kinetic weapons on this scale. Their shields were designed to absorb and disperse energy, to neutralize plasma bolts and laser beams. They had no defense against solid objects moving at relativistic speeds. The first volley struck the lead Valari cruiser before anyone on the alien ship even realized what was happening. The tungsten slugs punched through the energy shields as if they were not there, tore through the silver hull like paper, and exited the other side carrying fragments of the ship with them. The cruiser did not explode in any traditional sense. It simply came apart, its structure disintegrating under the catastrophic transfer of kinetic energy. Zorath watched in horror as one of his ships ceased to exist. The destruction was so sudden, so complete, that his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. One moment the cruiser had been there, intact and functional. The next moment, it was gone, replaced by an expanding cloud of debris and vapor. There had been 300 Valari on that ship. They were all dead now, killed in an instant by weapons that should not have existed. The other Valari commanders were screaming on the communication channels, demanding orders, begging for direction. Zorath tried to respond, tried to organize a counterattack, but the humans were not giving him time to think. The Horizon continued firing, its railguns sending streams of depleted uranium into the fleeing Valari ships. Point defense lasers swatted down escape pods that strayed too close, denying even the possibility of survivors. It was a massacre. The Valari ships tried to run, tried to jump to hyperspace, tried to do anything to escape the relentless human assault, but the Horizon was faster than it looked, its engines pushing it through space with unexpected acceleration. It chased down the fleeing vessels one by one, destroying them with methodical precision. There was no mercy in this attack, no hesitation. The humans were fighting to kill. In 4 minutes and 37 seconds, the battle was over. 11 Valari warships had been destroyed. Only the Endless Dawn remained intact, its engines damaged, its weapons offline, its crew cowering in terror. Commander Zorath sat in his command chair, surrounded by the wreckage of his fleet, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The human ship approached slowly, its weapons still trained on the crippled Valari vessel. Captain Mitchell appeared on the communication screen again, her face as calm as it had been before the battle. She told Zorath that she was sparing his ship for a reason. She needed someone to carry a message back to the Valari collective, someone to tell them what had happened here today. The message was simple. Humanity was not prey. Humanity would not be conquered. Humanity would not surrender. If the collective wanted war, they would have it. But the Valari should understand what they were getting into. They should understand that humans had been fighting since the day they first walked upright, that war was in their blood, that violence was their oldest tradition. Laura Mitchell smiled that cold smile again and told Zorath to run home and tell his masters what he had seen. Then she let him go. The Endless Dawn limped back to Valari space with its terrible news. Commander Zorath stood before the High Council in the great chamber on their homeworld, his body trembling as he described what he had witnessed. The holographic recordings played on the massive screens above him, showing the destruction of the scout fleet in brutal detail. The counselors watched in silence, their faces gray with shock, as 11 Valari warships were torn apart by human weapons. For 3 centuries, the High Council had not convened in emergency session. There had been no need. The collective was supreme, unchallenged, unquestioned. Minor rebellions were crushed before they could spread. Rival powers were absorbed or eliminated. The galaxy had been at peace, the peace of absolute dominion, and the Valari had grown comfortable in their supremacy. Now that comfort was shattered, broken by a single primitive warship and its cold-eyed captain. The council debated for hours. Some argued that the recordings must be fake, that no primitive species could possess such technology, that this was some kind of elaborate deception. Others demanded immediate retaliation, a massive fleet to crush the humans and burn their worlds to ash. A few suggested caution, pointing out that they knew almost nothing about human military capabilities beyond this single engagement. Perhaps diplomacy was the better path. In the end, pride won over wisdom. The Valari had ruled for 12,000 years. They could not allow this insult to stand. If word spread that a young species had defeated a Valari scout fleet, other races might begin to question collective authority. The subject peoples might start thinking about rebellion. The entire structure of their empire could begin to crack. No, The humans had to be crushed. And they had to be crushed quickly and publicly. Admiral Cyrus received his orders directly from the High Council. He was the most decorated military commander in Valari history, a veteran of 100 campaigns, the architect of a dozen conquests. His battle group consisted of 40 warships, including 2 massive dreadnoughts that served as mobile command platforms. Each dreadnought was larger than any human vessel, bristling with weapons, protected by shields that could withstand sustained bombardment. Cyrus had never lost a battle. He did not intend to start now. The fleet assembled at the staging point and made the jump to human space. 3 days of hyperspace travel. 3 days for Cyrus to study the recordings from the Scout Fleet engagement. 3 days to develop his strategy. He was not a fool. He had seen what human weapons could do, and he respected their capability, but he also believed in numbers. 1 human ship had defeated 12 Valari vessels. 40 Valari ships, including 2 dreadnoughts, would overwhelm any defense the humans could mount. When the battle group emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the human solar system, they found the USS Horizon waiting for them. But the human vessel was no longer alone. 12 more warships had joined it, arranged in a defensive formation around a much larger ship that Cyrus did not recognize. His sensors identified it as a carrier, a vessel designed to launch and recover smaller attack craft. The humans called it the USS Resolute. Admiral Kate Navarro stood on the flag bridge of the Resolute, watching the Valari fleet appear on her tactical display. She was 51 years old, a career naval officer like Laura Mitchell, with the same cold determination in her eyes. She had been given command of the 1st Carrier Strike Group 6 months ago, and she had spent every day since preparing for this moment. The aliens were coming, and humanity was ready. The strike group consisted of the Resolute and 12 escort vessels, including the Horizon under Captain Mitchell's command. Together they carried over 300 fighters, small single-pilot attack craft armed with missiles and guns. The fighters were the key to human strategy. The Valari had never developed comparable craft. Their doctrine relied entirely on capital ships, massive vessels that slugged it out at close range. They had no experience fighting against swarms of fast-moving attackers. Admiral Cyrus opened a communication channel and demanded that the humans surrender. His voice was calm and measured, the voice of someone who believed absolutely in his own superiority. He explained that resistance was futile, that the collective had weapons that could crack planets, that humanity had no hope of survival against the full might of Valari military power. He gave them 1 hour to stand down and submit to collective authority. Kate Navarro listened to the entire speech without interrupting. She had expected something like this. The aliens were arrogant, convinced of their own invincibility despite the evidence of the Scout Fleet disaster. They probably thought that engagement was a fluke, a lucky shot, something that could not be repeated. They were about to learn otherwise. When Cyrus finished speaking, Kate asked if he was done. He confirmed that he was. She nodded slowly, as if considering his words, and then she gave her response. She ordered all fighters to launch. The Resolute's hangar bays opened, and 300 human fighters poured into space like angry hornets from a disturbed nest. They formed up in squadrons, each squadron assigned to a specific target, each pilot knowing exactly what they needed to do. The Valari sensors tracked them but could not lock on. The fighters were too small, too fast, too numerous. The alien targeting systems were designed to track capital ships, not tiny craft that could change direction in an instant. Admiral Cyrus watched the swarm of human fighters approach and felt the first stirring of doubt. This was not how space battles were supposed to work. Capital ships fought capital ships. That was the natural order, the way things had been done for thousands of years. These tiny craft were an insult to proper military tradition. But tradition did not stop missiles. Tradition did not stop bullets. Tradition did not stop 300 determined pilots from tearing into his fleet with savage efficiency. The battle had begun. The human fighters hit the Valari fleet like a hammer striking glass. They came in waves, squadron after squadron, exploiting gaps in the alien formation that the enemy commanders did not even know existed. The Valari point defense systems tried to track them, tried to shoot them down, But the targeting algorithms were useless. They had been designed to engage missiles and torpedoes, not manned craft that could think and react and adapt in real time. Lieutenant Dan Cooper led the first attack run. He was 28 years old, a farm boy from Nebraska who had dreamed of flying since he was old enough to look up at the sky. Now he was diving through a storm of plasma fire, his fighter twisting and rolling to avoid enemy shots, his eyes fixed on the massive dreadnought that served as Admiral Sirius's flagship. The ship was enormous, a mountain of silver metal bristling with weapons, but Dan was not afraid. He had trained for this. He was ready. His wingman, Lieutenant Nicole Park, flew just off his right wing. She was the best shot in the squadron, calm under pressure, with reflexes that bordered on superhuman. As they approached the dreadnought, she locked onto the main sensor array and fired. Her missile streaked across the void and struck the target dead center. The array exploded in a shower of sparks and debris, and suddenly the massive ship was partially blind. The dreadnought's commanders scrambled to compensate. They switched to backup sensors, tried to coordinate with other ships in the fleet, but the damage was done. Their ability to direct fleet defense had been crippled in a single strike. Other fighters were already moving in, targeting weapon batteries and shield emitters, slowly picking the giant apart. Meanwhile, the human capital ships advanced. The Horizon led the charge, Captain Mitchell pushing her vessel directly into the heart of the Volari formation. Her crew moved with practiced efficiency, each officer knowing exactly what to do, each system functioning at peak performance. They had drilled for this moment countless times, running simulations, war games, exercises. Now the real thing was here, and they were not going to fail. The Horizon's main guns opened fire on a Volari cruiser that strayed too close. The tungsten slugs punched through the alien shields and tore the ship apart from the inside. Secondary explosions rippled along the hull as power systems overloaded and fuel reserves ignited. The cruiser broke in half, both pieces tumbling away into the darkness, and the Horizon was already moving on to its next target. Admiral Cyrus watched his fleet dying around him and could not understand what was happening. His ships were supposed to be invincible. His tactics were supposed to be flawless. He had studied warfare for centuries, had written books on military strategy, had trained generations of Volari officers. How could primitives be defeating him? The answer was simple, but he was too proud to see it. The Volari had not fought a real war in over 1,000 years. Their military existed to intimidate, to crush rebellions before they started, to maintain order through the threat of overwhelming force. They had forgotten what it meant to face an enemy that could fight back, an enemy that was not afraid, an enemy that had something worth dying for. Humans had never forgotten. Every generation of humanity had known war. They had fought with spears and arrows, with guns and bombs, with weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single flash of light. They had seen the worst of what their species could do, and they had survived. They had learned, and now they were applying those lessons to a new kind of battlefield. The battle raged for 6 hours. The Volari fought with desperate courage, their commanders refusing to retreat even as their ships were destroyed around them. They managed to shoot down a few human fighters, managed to damage a couple of escort vessels, but it was not enough. The humans were too fast, too coordinated, too ruthless. They exploited every weakness, punished every mistake, showed no mercy to those who had come to enslave their world. Admiral Cyrus died when his flagship finally broke apart under concentrated fire from the Resolute. The dreadnought had taken dozens of hits, its shields failing section by section, its hull cracking under the relentless bombardment. In the end, a full salvo from the carrier's main batteries struck the reactor core, and the ship vanished in a brilliant flash of light. 3,000 Volari died in that moment, including the most celebrated admiral in their history. The second dreadnought tried to flee. Its commander ordered an emergency jump to hyperspace, desperate to escape the slaughter. But the human fighters were faster. A squadron led by Lieutenant Cooper targeted the hyperdrive systems, their missiles tearing through the engineering section and destroying the delicate machinery that made faster-than-light travel possible. The dreadnought was trapped, unable to run, and the human capital ships closed in for the kill. When the shooting finally stopped, the silence was deafening. 32 Valari warships drifted dead in space, their hulls torn open, their crews gone. The remaining 8 vessels fled in disarray, their commanders too shocked and terrified to maintain any kind of formation. They jumped to hyperspace the moment their drives were charged, not even bothering to recover escape pods or search for survivors. Admiral Kate Navarro surveyed the battlefield from the flag bridge of the Resolute. Debris fields stretched for thousands of kilometers, glittering in the light of distant stars. Bodies floated among the wreckage, Valari and human alike, united in death. She felt no joy in this victory, no satisfaction. War was not something to celebrate, but it was something humanity knew how to do. Human losses were light. 4 fighters had been destroyed, their pilots killed in action. No capital ships had been lost, though several had sustained damage that would require weeks of repair. It was a remarkable achievement. A victory that would echo through galactic history. Captain Mitchell brought the Horizon alongside the Resolute and opened a communication channel to Admiral Navarro. The 2 women looked at each other through the view screens, sharing a moment of quiet understanding. They had done what they set out to do. They had protected their home. They had shown the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated. But they both knew this was only the beginning. The news of the Battle of Proxima spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Every species with access to interstellar communication heard the story within days. The mighty Valari Collective, rulers of 100,000 worlds, masters of the Orion Arm for 12,000 years, had been defeated by primitives. Not just defeated, but humiliated. 40 warships sent to crush a young species, and only 8 had returned. 2 dreadnoughts, the pride of the Valari Navy, had been destroyed. Their greatest admiral was dead. Their reputation for invincibility was shattered forever. The subject races of the collective watched the recordings in secret, passing them from ship to ship, from world to world, spreading the truth that the Valari had tried to suppress. Some wept with joy. Others began to whisper about possibilities that had seemed impossible just days before. If the humans could stand against the collective, perhaps others could too. Perhaps the age of Valari dominion was finally coming to an end. On the Valari homeworld, the High Council met in emergency session for the 2nd time in a month. The mood was very different now. There were no more calls for war, no more demands for human blood. The councilors sat in stunned silence, their faces pale, their confidence broken. They had sent their best, and their best had failed. What could they possibly do now? Some argued for a massive mobilization, for gathering every ship in the collective and launching an overwhelming assault on human space. But the military advisors quickly put an end to that idea. The Valari fleet was large, yes, but it was spread thin across a vast empire. Pulling ships from patrol routes would leave dozens of systems undefended, and the subject races were already restless. A full mobilization might trigger the very rebellions they were trying to prevent. Others suggested developing new weapons, new technologies to counter human capabilities. But that would take years, perhaps decades. And there was no guarantee of success. The humans had achieved in 1 century what the Valari had not managed in 12,000 years. They had found ways to kill that no one else had ever imagined. Who knew what else they were capable of? In the end, the High Council chose the only path that remained open to them. They sent a diplomatic delegation to human space, carrying offers of peace. It was the first time in Valari history that they had sued for terms with a species they had intended to conquer. The humiliation was almost unbearable, but the alternative was worse. Captain Laura Mitchell received the delegation aboard the USS Horizon. She had been promoted to admiral in the weeks following the battle, given command of a new fleet being assembled to defend Earth. But she had asked to handle this meeting personally. She had started this war, and she wanted to be there when it ended. The Valari ambassador was an elderly female named Tara, one of the few counselors who had argued for caution from the beginning. She looked at Admiral Mitchell with something like respect in her ancient eyes. She had seen the recordings of the battle, had watched this human woman stand unflinching against impossible odds. Whatever else the humans might be, they were not cowards. The negotiations lasted 3 weeks. The humans demanded much, and the Valari had no choice but to agree. The collective would recognize human sovereignty over their entire solar system and the 3 nearest star systems. They would withdraw all military vessels from a buffer zone extending 50 light-years from Earth. They would release all enslaved species within their territory, allowing them to return to their homeworlds or seek refuge in human space. It was a harsh peace, but Terra accepted it. She understood that the alternative was continued war, and she knew that the collective could not afford that. The Empire was already beginning to crack. Rebellions were breaking out on a dozen worlds, inspired by the human example. The Valari needed peace, needed time to stabilize their crumbling dominion. Admiral Mitchell signed the treaty on behalf of humanity. She felt no triumph in this moment, no sense of victory. She had seen too much death, lost too many friends, carried too many burdens to celebrate, but she felt something like hope. For the first time in human history, her species had a place among the stars that no one could take away from them. In the months that followed, everything changed. The liberated species sent delegations to Earth, seeking alliances, offering friendship, asking for protection. They told stories of centuries under Valari rule, of families torn apart, of cultures destroyed, of hope slowly dying, until the humans had shown them that resistance was possible. They looked at humanity with something like awe. These strange creatures who had done what no one else had managed to do. Other species began to ask questions about humans, to study their history, to try to understand how such a young civilization had become so powerful. The answers were disturbing. Humans had spent their entire existence fighting each other. Their history was a long parade of wars, conquests, genocides, and atrocities. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their own world, and had come within moments of using them. They were violent, aggressive, and dangerous by nature. But there was another side to the story. Humans were also capable of incredible kindness, of sacrifice, of love that transcended all boundaries. They had built great civilizations, created beautiful art, explored the deepest mysteries of the universe. They had looked into the abyss of their own destruction and found the strength to step back. They were complicated creatures, full of contradictions, capable of both terrible evil and profound good. Admiral Mitchell understood this better than most. She knew what her species was capable of: the darkness and the light. She knew that humanity had not reached the stars because they were peaceful or enlightened. They had reached the stars because they were survivors, because they refused to die, because they fought for what they believed in, no matter the cost. She stood on the bridge of her new flagship, the dreadnought USS Vanguard, watching the first transports of liberated peoples departing for their homeworlds. Commander Jake Reyes stood at her side, now a captain himself, commanding one of the escort vessels. Lieutenant Dan Cooper had been promoted and given his own squadron. Lieutenant Nicole Park was teaching a new generation of pilots how to fight. They had won this war, but Mitchell knew that others would come. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers. Other empires would rise to challenge humanity. Other threats would emerge from the darkness between stars, but humanity would be ready. They had always been ready. Mitchell smiled as she watched the transport ships disappear into the distance. Humanity did not start fights, but they always finished them.